Welcome back to Serger Tip Clips. Today we are going to answer some burning questions about the upper looper converter. I've had a lot of emails, and when I do in-person classes, when we switch over to a 2-thread overlock stitch, a lot of people say, well, what is that thing? What is the upper looper converter? And if I don't need to have thread in my upper looper, then why do I need this? And why do I have to keep the upper looper active even if there isn't any thread in it? So let's start at the beginning and talk about what is the upper looper converter, how does it work, and why do I need to know about this? Depending on the brand and model machine you own, your upper looper converter may be a separate component that you would find in an accessory case with your machine, or it may be placed someplace within the machine itself to keep it safe. And I would suggest checking your owner's manual, and that will tell you if you have one for your machine and where to find it. You also may have one that looks like this. You may have one that looks like this as separate components. They both do the exact same thing. They look a little bit different though. Or on my machine, the upper looper converter is connected to the upper looper itself. It's a permanent part of that part of the machine, and it can't be removed and taken off. So that makes it very handy because it can never get lost, and it is a small piece, so that is a possibility. So if you do find it, make sure you don't lose it. On some brands of machines, the upper looper converter is called the subsidiary looper. This is just a difference in terminology among different brands of machines. They are both the exact same thing, and they work in the same way. So this information really is universal across different brands of machines. Some examples of 2-thread overlock stitches where you would engage your upper looper converter and have thread in just your lower looper and either your right or left overlock needle are the blanket stitch, the flatlock stitch or reverse flatlock stitch, the raindrop stitch, and also a 2-thread wrap stitch, which gives a beautiful edge. Let's take a look inside my machine, and I will show you exactly what the upper looper converter does, and it will, I think, clear up the reason that even though there isn't any thread in the upper looper, why it still needs to remain active and not locked down. Mine is attached to my upper looper. It's right here. And to activate it, I just flip it from right to left, and you can see on the end of it, there is a tiny prong. And what I want to do with that is push back gently on this, and that prong will click into the eye of the upper looper, and you can hear it and feel it. And it's very important to make sure that it is clicked in. Sometimes I've had people send me emails who say, I put the upper looper converter over, but I'm not getting any stitch. And it's because they didn't do that last step of making sure that the prong is in the eye of the looper. So let's move on to the next step, and that would be threading my lower looper. Now, I have a very good tip on this, and that is when you're planning to do a 2-thread stitch, make sure that your upper looper converter is already in place and that it's clicked into the eye of that looper, because you don't want to thread your lower looper first. And let me just show you what you don't want to do first. I'm going to lock my threading tubes, and I'm going to bring my lower looper thread into the airport. Here it is. Now, what happens when you thread your lower looper? Not all the time, but it has happened to me a number of times. And the stitch does not form correctly. So I don't want that to happen to you. Sometimes we bring it back, and this is what you don't want to see. You don't want your lower looper thread under the converter. So what I always suggest that people do is click the converter into the upper looper, then thread the lower looper, because then there's no way that can get caught between the looper and converter. And that will definitely cause a problem with the stitch. There we go. So now there's no way for that to go in. And that really is my little safety for that. The front doors of the machine are open, and the 890 won't operate automatically with the doors open. So I am going to turn the hand wheel manually so that you can see how the converter is able to grab the lower looper thread to carry it over to the needle thread and form the stitch. So there it is being held. I'm holding the thread chain behind the presser foot, and you can see how the stitch forms over that stitch finger. Without the converter on, that pink thread would slide off of the upper looper and no stitch would form. I have a top stitch needle in the left overlock position. My stitch is number 11, the 2-thread flatlock. And if you've looked at my raindrop tip clip, you know that that stitch number 11 is like magic. There are 4 different stitches that you can do with that. My stitch width dial is on 9, and I have my MTC dial on +2, and that's right here. That's on the L890. And what that does is that moves my stitch finger just a tiny bit further right and widens out the stitch, which is really nice for flat locking. So what I'm going to do right now is a reverse flat lock. And the thread that's in my top stitch needle is a 12-weight Egyptian cotton, and that will form the ladders. I have Serger cone thread in my lower looper. This is a batik, so it's hard to tell which is the right and wrong side. But in order for my decorative threads to show on the right side, you would place your fabrics right sides together. So I am going to bring this, get this right under. I'll trim off just a smidge on the edge. The machine will still sound a little bit louder than normal simply because I have my lower looper tension on 9. My left needle tension is on 1. So there's a big difference between the two of them. Chain off. And let's go over to the table and take a look at this. Here is my flat lock stitched out. The pink Serger cone thread is my lower looper thread, and on the top side, the needle thread looks like a straight stitch. Let's flip it over, and here is that pretty raindrop stitch, but we're going to turn this into a reverse flat lock. So I'm going to open my fabrics and pull it flat. Look how pretty that is. Now, I've got one more tip to show you. You can see underneath that there is a little bit of a fold in the fabric that happens sometimes, and I'm going to show you how to get rid of that. This is definitely a non-sewing tool. It's a kebab skewer. It's wooden. And I like it simply because even though the tip is pointed, it's not so sharp that it's going to snag any of the threads by accident. So I'm going to turn this sideways. And what I want to do is get the tip of that skewer under the fold and just coax it flat, just very easily. And if you don't have something that's long enough, or you're working on a longer piece of fabric, you can do part of it from one edge and then the other part from the other edge. But now that fabric is laying flat and smooth underneath the right side of that stitch. I would just give that a nice press too, but it sure looks really quite good without pressing. So let's look at the opposite side. And there is my lower looper thread. And you can just see the lines of that decorative thread, the yellow thread, on the edges. So that is how you accomplish that 2-thread flatlock stitch. Thanks for joining me today. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below. I'll get back to you quickly with an answer. And I hope that does clear up some of the mystery of the upper looper converter, because I know myself, I was always sort of mystified by it in the beginning. And then once I understood why it was so important to know about it and to understand it, it made it so much more fun. And again, it opened up the possibility of using some of these beautiful 2-thread overlock stitches. Happy sewing and serging.